All right, so today I want to make some potato chips, and specifically I want to make that thicker cut kettle-style potato chips, or crisps, as they're known if you live abroad. Now I'm going to season mine with the barbecue flavor that I'm going to make here, which is a pretty common flavor here in the US. However, with this method, to be honest, you can season this however you want to. Now I have to be truthful here that there is some sort of magic in making your own potato chips. Now something I didn't really realize until I embarked on this quest, and when you're done, you'll have this really crispy, still warm, and not super oily or greasy flavor that you usually get with the store brand version. I really think this is one of those things that you have to kind of make on your own, and it's definitely worth it. All right, with all that preamble out of the way, it's time to get started. So the first thing that I'm gonna do is make the barbecue flavoring. Believe it or not, barbecue flavoring is just a bunch of spices and some sugar, so I'll quickly go through this. We're gonna need 1 tablespoon of chili powder, 1 tablespoon of paprika, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, and a now optional ingredient, because this can be hard to find, is 1 teaspoon of celery seeds. But this stuff really is that secret flavor. Next, we need 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and then lastly, I added 1 teaspoon of salt, which turned out to be pretty low. So I think actually 2 teaspoons of salt is a better option here. It's kind of more akin to what you get from the bag. All right, now mix this all up with a whisk, a fork, or even your hands. And I personally decided to strain mine because the brown sugar was acting a little bit lumpy. Now that we have a nice and uniform barbecue powder, it's time to begin working on the actual potato chips. All right, so let's talk potato. Now I'm using a Russet potato here, which is a kind of more starchy style, almost baking style potato if you're living abroad. But I have heard that the more waxy style potatoes can work. I'm not really sure about that, but I know that the Russet potatoes or the starchy potatoes really worked well for what I wanted. Now to get the amount you'd normally get from a bag of potato chips, I only really needed about 2 of these bigger potatoes. And now we have to make a choice. You can choose to peel the skin, but I kind of like it on my chips. So if you're just like me, just make sure that you really thoroughly rinse and scrub the potatoes. Deep fried dirt isn't really super tasty. Okay, so now we need to additionally prepare something else, which is a bowl of cold water. And if you have it, add some ice. This will help rinse off the starch from the edges of the potato, something that will result in a soggy potato chip that isn't super crisp. I will talk about the science of starches in a future video, or if you're not really feeling like waiting, feel free to check out my bread video because I go into this quite in depth in that video. All right, so to get an even uniform cut, I'm gonna slice my potatoes using a Japanese style mandolin slicer. And this thing is gonna allow you to be able to make repeatable slices. And you wanna kind of just dial in a thickness that's, somewhat thick. It's really hard to describe thicknesses without, nobody wants to pull out a ruler and measure this, but you want just basically something that feels like a kettle chip, basically maybe like 2 or 3 normal potato chips stacked together. And the reason I'm using this mandolin is because we want all the chips to fry at roughly the same amount of time. So if we were to cut this with a knife, we may have varying thicknesses, and then that means that these potato chips won't fry uniformly. So with this mandolin slicer, we can really ensure that we have a good even slice on over everything. Just collect the slices into the cold water, and as I said earlier, I sliced about 2 of these potatoes, but like Anakin in the Jedi Temple, there really isn't anything stopping me from slicing away here. So speaking of horrible burns, it's time to fry up these potato chips. Heat up a pot, bringing the level of oil somewhere below half the height of the pot or lower. I know oil can be expensive and using a lot of it is it's difficult, and even recycling it can be difficult. So you can use less oil and it is okay to do so, but it just may mean that you have to kind of fry in a smaller batch. What we want to do now is heat up this oil until it reaches about 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Celsius. Now, while the oil heats up, we need to drain the potato slices from the ice bath. I'm just using a sieve here, and I'm just going to give it a few minutes for the slices to kind of dry out a smidge. We really don't want excess water because that can cause splattering, which can deal damage. Now, once the oil reaches our desired frying temperature, toss in a few test slices to make sure that everything looks good. And if everything looks good, go ahead and toss in a few more. And I typically toss in about 15 to 20 chips at a time, allowing them to sit and fry for a few minutes. Now, we're actually going to fry these chips twice. So for the first batch, we're looking to fry them for about 3 to 4 minutes, and they should start to firm up and become rigid, but they'll still maintain this sort of pale potato color, and they won't turn golden just yet. Once you can feel them become a little rigid, or after about 3 minutes, go ahead and start to take them out using something like this spider strainer that I have here. And go ahead and place these chips out onto a rack or paper towels, and we really just want to absorb any excess oil so that these chips aren't like cooling in a pool of oil while we fry up the rest of the chips. Speaking of which, that's the next step. So We want to just go ahead and fry this in batches. The only thing we need to do between batches is just make sure that the oil returns to the frying temperature of 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Celsius. So while this batch fries, let me tell you why we're frying them twice. When we fry the chip the first time, we're really heating up the potato, including the moisture inside. Now inside the oil, it's difficult for the moisture to escape from the potato chips. This is why fried foods are always so moist. It really traps the moisture inside. However, moisture is the enemy to a good crispy chip. So when we place the chip out to cool, that allows the moisture from inside of the potato, which is really hot, to evaporate from the chip and leave us a slightly drier chip. Now, if you look at the chips that are cooling, they're somewhat rigid, but they still have some leftover moisture, and that leaves them a little soft. Now, the second frying will really resolve this. So after we've cooked up all of our chips, it's time to make sure the oil returns to our frying temperature, and then we can toss the chips in for a second fry. Now, unlike the first time, these will crisp up and brown very fast. So really don't walk away or turn your back. It's merely a matter of a minute to 30 seconds to have a nice and crispy chip. And once they do get crispy and brown, just immediately pull them out and collect them into a different bowl. And we're just gonna do this for all of the chips, and it'll go a lot faster now because it takes a lot less time to fry. And so they should still be warm and a little bit oily, and just go ahead and toss the seasoning powder over the chips and give them a good toss. Really just ensure that all of them are coated. And the residual oil on the chips will actually help adhere the barbecue powder to the chips. And I recommend serving these up quickly, and because these warm chips they're phenomenal, and they really will blow your mind or your guest's mind. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider subscribing. And thank you guys so much for the support recently. It really has just made my life I'm so happy. I'm overwhelmed. Thank you guys, and I'll see you guys next week. All right, bye.